He walked among mortals as a humble wanderer, cloaked in grey and leaning on a weathered staff. But behind those kind eyes burned a light older than the sun and fiercer than the fires of Mount Doom. What secret strength did Gandalf carry beneath his simple guise? And why did even the Dark Lord himself fear what the wizard might become if unleashed? I first heard whispers of Gandalf's true nature in the archives of Minas Tirith, years after the War of the Ring had ended. I was a young scholar then, poring over ancient texts that few had touched since Isildur's time. Most spoke of battles long forgotten, of kingdoms risen and fallen, but one scroll, its edges crumbling with age, spoke of something else entirely. 5 came from across the sea, it read, clothed in the bodies of old men. But they were not men. They were fire and wisdom incarnate, bound by chains of their own making. The scroll told of the Istari, the wizards, sent by the Valar to counter Sauron's growing influence in Middle-earth. But unlike the tales told to children, this account spoke of their nature in words that chilled my blood. Greatest among them was Kurumo, called Saruman in the north. Second was Olorin, the grey pilgrim, keeper of the flame imperishable, servant of the secret fire. I had heard Gandalf called many names, Mithrandir, Greyhame, Stormcrow, Incanus, but never this, Olorin, keeper of the flame imperishable. The significance of these words would not become clear to me until years later. The mystery deepened when I travelled north to what remained of Rivendell. The last homely house east of the sea stood empty now, most of its inhabitants having sailed west. Yet its library remained, preserved by enchantments that even time hesitated to challenge. It was there I found the accounts of Elrond Half-Elven, written in his own hand. He arrived at my door one autumn evening, Elrond wrote, rain-soaked and weary as he often appeared. Yet that night, as lightning split the sky, I glimpsed something beneath the weather-worn facade, a light that no mortal frame should contain, bright as the stars before the sun and moon were made. Elrond, who had lived since the First Age, who had stood beside Gil-galad against Sauron himself, had been afraid, not of Gandalf, but of what dwelled within him. We spoke long into the night, the account continued, of the growing shadows, of the forest paths that grew darker with each passing year. And then, perhaps thinking me asleep, he stood by the window and whispered words in a tongue even I barely remembered, the high language of Valinor. As he spoke, the storm outside calmed, as if the very heavens heeded his command. This was not the wandering wizard of fireworks and smoke rings that Hobbit children knew. This was something far older, far more powerful. The pieces began to fall into place when I uncovered a fragment of conversation recorded by Frodo Baggins in the Red Book of Westmarch. He described Gandalf's confrontation with the Balrog on the bridge of Khazad-dûm. "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun." Most readers passed over these words, seeing them as merely an impressive declaration. They did not understand their true significance. I did not understand until I found an ancient Quenya text that spoke of the creation of Arda itself. In the beginning was Eru the One, who in Arda is called Ilúvatar, and he made first the Ainur, the Holy Ones, that were the offspring of his thought. And Eru kindled within them a flame, a portion of his own eternal spirit, the secret fire that gives life and reality. The secret fire, the flame imperishable, was no mere metaphor. It was the creative power of Ilúvatar himself, the divine spark that brought the universe into being. And Gandalf had called himself its servant, its wielder. I trembled as the implication became clear. Gandalf was not simply a wizard with magical abilities. He was a Maia, an angelic spirit clothed in mortal form, who carried within him a connection to the very creative force of the universe. My search led me to a dying elf in Ithilien, one of the last of his kind to remain in Middle-earth. Artheon had been present at the White Council when Saruman was named its head. "I served wine at that gathering," he told me, his voice thin with age. "They thought me just a servant, but I heard their words. The Lady Galadriel wished for Mithrandir to lead the council, but he refused." "Why?" I asked. Artheon's eyes grew distant. "Kurumo, Saruman, spoke of power, of strength enough to drive back the shadow. But Mithrandir," he grew still, and for a moment, the air around him seemed to shimmer with heat. He said, "If we seek to fight the enemy with his own weapons, we will become what we behold. The fire I serve is not for domination." And then he looked at each of them in turn, and even the Lady of the Golden Wood lowered her gaze. This was the crux of it, the darkest secret that was hidden in plain sight. Gandalf, alone among the Istari, understood the true nature of power. He knew that he carried within him a force that could have challenged Sauron directly, that could have reshaped mountains and commanded armies with a word, and he chose not to use it. Only twice in all the long years of his mission did Gandalf come close to revealing his true nature. The first was at Khazad-dûm, where he faced an equal, another Maia, though one corrupted by darkness. "The Balrog of Morgoth," whispered an aged dwarf I met in Erebor, whose grandfather had been there. "A demon of the ancient world," they called it. But Tharkun, Gandalf, knew it for what it was, knew it by name. When Gandalf declared himself on that narrow bridge, he was not merely posturing, he was speaking to one who would understand exactly what he was and what he could do. The second time came after his return from death, when he cast down Saruman at Orthanc. The account from Gimli, son of Gloin, describes it thus: "His white robes seemed to shine with an inner light, and when he raised his staff, Saruman's broke with a crack like thunder." "Your staff is broken," said Gandalf, and it was not the voice of the friend who had traveled with us, but something older, something that made the very stones of Orthanc tremble. For just a moment, the disguise had slipped. The kindly old man had given way to Olorin, the Maia of Manwë and Varda, wielder of the secret fire. Imagine it, Gandalf standing before the Black Gate, not as an old man leading a hopeless diversion, but as a revealed Maia in his full glory. Imagine the skies darkening with his power, lightning answering his call, the very earth trembling at his word. Imagine Sauron, sensing an equal challenger at last, turning his full attention to this new threat. Yet, in some ways, a Dark Lord Gandalf would have been even worse than Sauron. Unlike Sauron, who could not comprehend a world beyond domination, Gandalf understood the minds of the free peoples. He had walked among them, shared their joys and sorrows, learned their weaknesses and fears. He would not have ruled through brute force alone, but through persuasion, wisdom, and a terrifying sense of moral righteousness. Tolkien himself foresaw this chilling possibility. In letter 246, he described how Gandalf as Ringlord would not have become a mere tyrant like Sauron, but something far more insidious. Gandalf as Ringlord would have been far worse than Sauron. He would have remained righteous, but self-righteous. He would have continued to rule and order things for good, and the benefit of his subjects according to his wisdom, which was and would have remained great. This is the ultimate horror, a world where evil is no longer distinguishable from good, where oppression is justified in the name of righteousness. Imagine a Middle-earth where people are forced to do good under pain of death, where free will is crushed under the weight of an all-knowing, all-controlling wisdom. As Tolkien chillingly concluded, Sauron multiplied evil, but he left good clearly distinguishable from it. Gandalf would have made good detestable and seem evil. A moral dictatorship, where the pursuit of righteousness becomes a form of tyranny, this would have been the true nightmare of a ring-wielding Gandalf. There is a passage in the private journals of Peregrine Took, written in his old age, that perhaps explains it best. I asked him once, after it was all over, why he hadn't done more, used more magic, like in the old stories. He looked at me with those eyes that seemed to see right through you and said, "My dear Pippin, that was never why I was sent. The greatest victory is not to crush your enemy with power, but to ensure he is defeated without destroying what you sought to save." This was Gandalf's darkest secret, hidden in plain sight throughout his long years in Middle-earth. He possessed the power to challenge Sauron directly, to reshape the world through force of will, and he deliberately chose not to use it. Not because he was afraid, not because he was weak, but because he understood what Saruman, in all his wisdom, had forgotten, that power wielded for its own sake corrupts, and that some victories come at too high a cost. When the White Ship sailed from the Grey Havens, carrying the ring-bearers to Valinor, Gandalf went with them. His task was complete. His long stewardship of Middle-earth ended at last. And what happened then, the accounts do not say. But I like to imagine that as the shores of Middle-earth receded behind them, something changed. The stooped shoulders straightened, the lined face smoothed. The grey beard and hair became a radiance of light, and Olorin, no longer bound by the limitations he had accepted for so long, stood revealed in his true form, not as the wielder of tremendous power, but as one who had understood the deeper wisdom, that the greatest strength lies not in what you can do, but in what you choose not to do. This was Gandalf's darkest secret, and his greatest legacy. Not that he possessed the power to change the world through force, but that he changed it instead through wisdom, courage, and faith in the smallest of beings. And perhaps that is why, even now, centuries later, we remember not his power, but his words. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. In the end, it was not the secret fire that saved Middle-earth. It was the small fires of courage kindled in the hearts of hobbits, of men, of elves and dwarves, fires that Gandalf, in his wisdom, had nurtured rather than overshadowed. And that, perhaps, was the greatest magic of all. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this type of content, don't forget to like and share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next one.